She was cast out by her family for getting pregnant, but no one knew the child's father was the secret Russian Mafia heir. The chandelier above the ballroom shimmered like a crown made of ice, catching light from 1,000 whispered glances. Elena stood beneath it, still and poised, her hands cold against the silk of her gown, heart loud beneath the subtle strings of a Tchaikovsky waltz. The air smelled of winter roses and aged money, powdered skin, waxed floor, and secrets cloaked in perfume. Voices drifted in Russian, English, French, never fully landing. She didn't belong here, not among these diplomatic ghosts dressed in fur and pride. Her mother's voice, clipped and perfect, had insisted she attend, for appearances, for the family. "You must remember who you are," she had said with the sharp edge of exile in her tone. But Elena had stopped remembering months ago, when she realized names meant little once they were torn from power. She was a Morozova, yes, but in a ballroom like this, she was only a body wrapped in inherited shame. And then he appeared. No announcement, no escort, just the weight of his presence threading through the crowd like smoke. She felt him before she saw him, felt something shift, like a storm breathing into the room, unseen yet inevitable. Her gaze was drawn, pulled across velvet and crystal, until it landed on a man in a black suit darker than the shadows behind him. His mask, gold-laced and severe, covered half his face, but his eyes were visible, eyes like storm-soaked stone, cold, watchful, knowing. He moved toward her with deliberate grace, each step an invitation she could not refuse. She did not blink, did not breathe. And when he stopped in front of her, offering his hand without a word, the rest of the room blurred into insignificance. Her gloved fingers slipped into his. His skin was warm. The orchestra shifted to a slower rhythm. He guided her to the center of the ballroom. Silence followed them like a held breath. "Tell me your name," she said softly. "No," he replied, voice wrapped in velvet and threat. "Names are for people who want to be found." Her heart stuttered. She almost smiled, almost ran, but didn't, couldn't. "You don't strike me as the hiding type." His hand settled on her waist, just above the swell of her hip, where her breath had no armor. "And yet," he murmured near her ear, "I haven't stopped watching you since you walked in." The dance began, not with choreography, but with tension. His hand guided, hers obeyed. Not once did he look away. His gaze stayed locked on her, not with admiration, but with possession barely disguised as interest. He smelled of something she couldn't quite name, leather, something sharp, almost burnt, dangerous, familiar. "You're Russian," she said, not a question. His mouth twitched beneath the mask. "So are you. Not like you." "No," he agreed. "Not like me." The music curved around them. Time bent. Elena didn't ask more. She didn't want to. It was madness to feel anything beyond curiosity for a man she couldn't name, but something in his presence burrowed under her skin, curling like heat between her ribs. "You shouldn't be here," she said finally. "And yet, here I am. And when the song ends, I won't follow you," he said, though his fingers tightened just slightly. "Not unless you want me to." She didn't answer. When the final note struck, he released her, slowly, reluctantly. The mask shifted as he stepped back, just enough to let her glimpse the edge of a scar at his jawline. A story, perhaps, but not tonight. He bowed without ceremony. "Until we meet again, Snezhinka." She stood there long after he disappeared into the glittering void of the crowd. Her breath returned, but not completely, and somewhere beneath her breastbone, something had begun, quiet, irreversible, and marked by hands she hadn't stopped feeling. He had watched her long before she saw him. Through the glass of the upper balcony, hidden in a shadow carved from marble and dusk, Luka Volkov stood with one hand on the railing and the other clenched at his side. She moved like a question that no man had dared ask aloud. Her posture said elegance. Her silence said rebellion. And the way she turned away from the crowd, it said she was already looking for a way out. He had been trained to recognize threats in faces, weaknesses in posture, lies in breath. But Elena Morozova was none of those things. She was a memory he hadn't yet made. She was danger in the shape of a woman who had no idea she'd just stepped into his world. He hadn't meant to touch her. He never meant to touch anything he couldn't own. And yet, there was something in her gaze that night, when her eyes locked onto his, that forced stillness into him, as if his heart, always kept at a distance from his own body, suddenly remembered what it was for. The moment her fingers met his, he felt it, an echo of something he'd never believed he'd deserve, something that did not belong to men like him. He told himself it would be one dance. He lied. The music was irrelevant. The room vanished. He didn't need to know her name to understand that whoever she was, she didn't belong to the world she had been forced into. He saw it in the way she avoided mirrors, in the tension between her shoulder blades, in the hunger buried beneath her perfect self-control. It mirrored his own. He didn't speak as he led her into the waltz. Words would have only ruined it. Names were paper masks, identities, currency. She didn't ask, and he didn't offer. That alone told him she understood more than the others. But when she asked where he was from, and he answered with a question disguised as truth, he saw her mouth tremble. Not from fear, from recognition. She knew his accent. She knew what it meant. Still, she didn't let go. After the music faded, after he bowed and left her standing in that golden silence, he returned to the darkness that raised him, not to forget her, but to protect what that moment had woken in him. Back in the suite above the Thames, he stripped off his gloves and poured a glass of vodka that burned like punishment. Across the room, on the table where his weapons had been laid out earlier, sat the invitation to the meeting he was meant to attend that night. He ignored it. Instead, he pressed his thumb to the lip of his glass. Slow, distracted. Elena. He didn't have her name, but it didn't matter. He had memorized the line of her jaw, the way her breath caught when he stepped too close, the flicker of heat behind her eyes when he spoke Russian into her skin. He would find her again. He always found what was his. The only question was, would she still be the same when he did? And what would be left of him by then? She hadn't meant for it to happen like this. There had been rules, unspoken, unbreakable ones, taught in cold kitchens and behind closed doors. Morozova women did not weep in public, did not falter, did not, under any circumstance, disappear with strangers at masquerade balls. And yet she had let him press her into the curve of his chest like a secret, had let his voice slide over her skin like a whisper too soft to mistrust. She had let herself believe it was just one night, but her body knew, before her mind admitted it, before her hands shook in the mornings and her eyes lingered too long on her reflection. Her body had whispered it in ways she couldn't ignore. Now, the test sat on the marble counter like a prophecy. Positive. That one word rang louder than her family's footsteps ever had. It beat inside her skull like a second heart. She stared at it, at the thin blue line, at the future unraveling at her feet like a rug pulled out from beneath centuries of decorum. She didn't remember sitting, but when the knock came at the door, she was already on the bathroom floor, back pressed to the cold tile, breathing through her teeth, as if the silence could reverse it, as if pretending hard enough could delay what came next. Elena? Her mother's voice, cool as vodka, filtered through the door. She didn't answer. Another knock. Sharper. Elena? Open this door. Still, nothing. Minutes passed. When she emerged, the mask had returned, chin lifted, shoulders back, the test, flushed, the truth, buried for now beneath skin and satin and obedience. But it didn't stay hidden for long. By the end of the week, her father was summoned. Her mother paced. Her cousins whispered. The name Volkov surfaced like a curse. How they knew, how they suspected it had been someone with power, with shadow. She never asked. They had eyes everywhere. They always had. You'll marry Dmitry Ivanenko, her uncle said, folding his hands like a judge pronouncing sentence. He's discreet, loyal. We'll say it's his child. The papers will be rewritten. No. The word was too soft at first, but it came again, louder, sharper. No. Her mother's glass slipped from her hand and shattered. Her father stood. Her uncle paled. Elena, I won't do it. You can exile me, disown me. I won't marry a man I don't know to cover your shame. She didn't remember what happened after that. Only the cold, the sharp click of the locks, the absence of warmth in a house that once held every echo of her name. She walked away with a coat that wasn't hers, a passport barely valid, and the ghost of a man's hands on her waist. Zurich was silent. Snow fell like a hush over rooftops and secrets. She found a studio above a bakery that didn't ask questions. She worked with her hands, cleaning dust from old icons, pretending she believed in saints more than survival. She named the child Alexei. She never said his father's name, because she hadn't known it, because if she had, she would have carved it into the wall just to remember who to blame when the nights grew long and the silence screamed louder than the wind. But sometimes, when the sky was the same bruised gray as that night, and the cold seeped through the windows, she remembered how his breath had felt against her ear, and her belly, growing now with quiet insistence, tightened, not in fear, but in something far more dangerous. Hope. He hadn't spoken her name aloud, not even once, not to his men, not to himself. It wasn't superstition, it was strategy. In his world, names held weight, and hers was already heavy enough in his mind, tied to a scent, a sound, a night that hadn't loosened its grip in over a year. Her silence had become his obsession. That one night in London had carved her into his memory with a blade too sharp to dull. He hadn't needed to know who she was. He needed only what she left behind, the feel of her lips brushing past his jaw when she said nothing at all. Her breath had trembled, but she hadn't. Now he stood in his father's private hall, the walls hung with oil portraits of men who'd killed for the family name. The air was thick with polished wood and history, the kind that bled. Dmitry Volkov sat at the head of a long table, fingers drumming with the precision of a man used to obedience. He hadn't aged so much as hardened, like stone that learned to stand taller under pressure. His voice didn't rise. It never had to. "You've been distracted." Luka said nothing. There was nothing to confess. "You let Petrova push into Tallinn. You missed the shipment from Odessa. And now you skip council meetings for, what, London parties?" Luka leaned back, slow, precise. "The Petrova front is stabilized. The Odessa shipment was rerouted through Warsaw. And London was personal." Dmitri's eyes flicked, like a knife deciding where to press. "Personal is for men with weaknesses. Are you weak now?" The question was acid wrapped in silk. Luka's jaw flexed, but his voice remained low. "No." The lie tasted like steel. Dmitri stood. The room hushed. Even the air braced itself. "You'll marry Ekaterina Orlova," he said simply. "Her father's bank holds too much leverage. She's clean, quiet, breedable. We need a legitimate heir to cement your position. I'm tired of waiting for you to outgrow your ghosts." There it was, the leash. Luka didn't flinch. "No." Dmitri's hand curled once over the back of a leather chair. "Excuse me?" Luka rose slowly, the scrape of his chair deliberate. He met his father's gaze without blinking. "I don't need a wife to claim what's already mine. You need a son." The sentence sliced through him. He held his breath for a second too long. Dmitri caught it. "You said nothing," he murmured. "But I see it now." Luka turned to leave. "Is it a girl?" Dmitri asked behind him, voice colder than the Neva. He stopped, not because of the question, but because of the implication. "If there's a child," Dmitri continued, "we'll find it. We'll clean the mess, secure the bloodline properly. Do what you clearly cannot." Luka's voice was razor sharp. "You'll do nothing." Dmitri smiled. "Then prove it." Outside, the air bit colder than it had in weeks. Snow had begun to fall, slow and soundless. Luka lit a cigarette with hands steadier than they should have been. The smoke curled like breath from something dying. He didn't have her name, not yet. But the child was real. He'd known it the second his father said the word, the shift in his chest, the echo, the instinct. He had left London with only a memory, but he would find more. It wasn't about love, it was about blood, and no one, not even Dmitry Volkov, would touch what was his. Zurich was colder this year, not in temperature, but in something deeper, like the silence had grown teeth, and the snow carried secrets instead of softness. Elena noticed it in the way the wind moved differently across the rooftops, in how the bells from the chapel near her apartment rang just off rhythm, in the hollow that formed behind her ribs whenever the world grew too still. She didn't sleep like she used to. Sleep now came in fragments, shattered windows of quiet between Alexei's breathing and the ghosts in her chest. At night, she'd trace the outlines of old icons with her fingers, pretending the cracked gold held answers. Her hands were steady when she worked, but inside, she never stopped trembling. Alexei was 3 now, light-haired, sharp-eyed, too perceptive for his age. He never asked about his father, but some children didn't have to. Sometimes, Elena would catch him staring into the mirror, as if waiting for a piece of himself to speak back. She gave him only what she could: warm milk, soft lullabies, half-truths wrapped in bedtime stories. "You were made from love," she whispered once, and hated herself for how much her voice shook on the word. She hadn't seen the man since London, hadn't spoken his name, hadn't needed to. Because some men didn't need to be present to remain. They haunted, they possessed, they echoed. And lately that echo was getting louder. It started with the letters, blank envelopes, no return address, no handwriting, just a single pressed flower each time, a snowdrop, then a poppy, then a sprig of heather. Elena burned the first 2. The third, she pressed into her journal, hands shaking. Then came the man on the street corner. She noticed him one morning outside the bakery below her building. He didn't look at her, didn't move, but she felt him the way you feel a flame too close to your skin. Weeks passed. He never approached, never disappeared, always reading the paper, always watching something else while his body tilted ever so slightly in her direction. She never told anyone, not because she wasn't afraid, but because fear had become something different now. Not sharp, not immediate, but slow and constant, like a drip against stone. One evening, as she walked home with Alexei bundled in her arms, she saw the man again. Same coat, same stillness. This time she stopped. He didn't flinch. She lowered her gaze, tightened her grip on her son, and kept walking. Inside, her apartment was quiet. Too quiet. She locked the door, bolted it, drew the curtains, sat on the edge of the bed, Alexei already asleep against her chest. His fingers curled into her blouse like he knew something was shifting. She stared into the dark and whispered, "Why now?" As if the air would answer, as if he would hear. But of course he already had. He had watched her from across the street for 17 days. Not because he didn't already know. He had known the moment her silhouette crossed the bakery window, the exact tilt of her head, the rhythm of her steps. She moved the same way she had that night beneath the chandelier, like she didn't belong to the ground. And still, she looked over her shoulder too often, paused too long at doors, lived too carefully for a woman who claimed no enemies. But he knew better, because he was her enemy once, because he was still the man she ran from. Luca hadn't moved, not until now. He stood at the edge of the alley as the sun dipped low. Its reflection stretched across wet cobblestones like gold bleeding into ash. Her building loomed tall and quiet, windows shuttered, curtains drawn. He knew which one was hers. The second from the left, third floor, warm light flickering behind thick velvet. She was home, which meant the boy was too. His son. He didn't say the word aloud. Couldn't. It tasted too foreign in his mouth. He had no language for fatherhood, no memory to measure it against, only instinct and the cruel, relentless need to see him with his own eyes. He crossed the street without sound. Inside the corridor, the air was different, older, dust-lined. He moved like a ghost, like someone whose name had already been erased. Each step echoed against painted stone, steady and patient, as if the walls themselves remembered his arrival. He didn't knock. The lock gave under his hand, with barely a whisper. The apartment smelled like lavender and paint, and something softer he couldn't name. He stood at the threshold, letting the scent wrap around him like a memory. Then he saw her. She was seated on the floor, back pressed to the wall, a book open on her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in minutes. Her hair was longer now, darker, her body thinner, her presence just as sharp. She didn't look up, not at first, but she felt him, the way only she could. When she raised her head, their eyes met, and the room lost its shape. Luca. His name, spoken like a blade drawn slow from its sheath. He didn't move, neither did she. There were no screams, no curses. Only that silence, heavy, sacred, blistering. "You found me." His voice was quieter than memory. "You didn't make it easy." I wasn't trying to hide. He let the lie hang between them. Then he saw it, just behind her, small limbs curled under a thick blanket, cheeks flushed with sleep, a single hand fisted in the fabric as if bracing for dreams. Everything inside him stilled. He stepped forward. She stood quickly, blocking his view with her body. "No. Elena, you don't get to say his name." "I haven't. You don't get to look at him." His gaze stayed on her, not past her, on her. "I need to. You need to leave." "You ran," he said, and his voice was steel under velvet. "But you didn't erase me. You couldn't. You were a mistake." "No," he said, and the word struck deep. "I was a beginning." She flinched, almost invisible, but he saw it. He always saw it. "He looks like you," she whispered, not out of affection, but accusation. "I know. You think that means something? It means everything." For a breath, the world didn't move, and then, softly, like a thread pulled through a wound, her voice broke. "What are you going to do?" He stepped closer. "What I should have done the moment I lost you." She hadn't heard his footsteps. Not when he entered. Not when he crossed the space between them like a silent vow. But now, with him standing there, too close, too still, his presence was louder than any door could have been. It wrapped around her ribs like a vice, pressed cold fingers at the base of her neck, and stirred something she had spent years burying beneath lullabies and locked windows. Luka Volkov was not a memory. He was real. Here. Again. She could feel the tension radiating from his body, not as threat, but as a question he didn't dare ask aloud. And her own body, traitorous and trembling, remembered too much. The heat of his hand on her waist, the weight of his gaze like silk threaded with steel, the voice that had once made her forget everything she'd ever promised herself. She hated that her heartbeat shifted with his breath. He hadn't touched her. Not yet. But the space between them pulsed like something alive. "I shouldn't have come," he said, low, but without apology. She shook her head. "And yet you did." His jaw tightened. Because I had to. No, you chose to. Don't pretend this was fate. His eyes flicked to the blanket behind her. You didn't tell me. You weren't supposed to know? Why? Her voice cracked like glass under weight. Because you were never meant to stay. He stepped forward. She didn't retreat, but her spine pressed harder to the wall, like if she became part of it, she could keep from falling. You think I wouldn't have wanted him? He asked, and the words hit harder than she'd prepared for. I don't know what you want, Luca. I only know what you destroy. Something passed between them then, raw, invisible, ancient. And still, he didn't touch her. His restraint was worse than violence. It meant he understood what she feared most, and didn't care to prove her wrong. I've watched him sleep, he murmured. I stood outside this building for weeks. Not because I didn't know what was inside, but because I wasn't sure I deserved to be. Her breath hitched. He continued, voice darker now. I wasn't made for softness, Elena, but he was. And somehow, so were you. Don't do that, she whispered. Do what? Make me remember. His gaze met hers, unmoving. You never forgot. Neither had he. She could feel it in every unspoken word, every inch he hadn't dared cross, every second his body screamed to touch her and didn't. That was his power, and his punishment. When he finally moved, it wasn't to touch her. It was to kneel, slowly, soundlessly, and rest one hand gently on the edge of the blanket that covered the boy, his son. Elena didn't stop him, couldn't. She watched his shoulders tense, saw the way his fingers curled with reverence and restraint. And when he finally looked back up at her, the wall she'd spent years building fractured in silence. What now? She asked, softer than she meant. He rose to his full height again. Now, he said, we stop pretending the past didn't happen, and we decide if it's going to kill us. She didn't answer, because part of her wasn't ready for the truth, and the other part already knew it. He hadn't meant to stay. That was never the plan. He was supposed to see, to confirm, to walk away with the image of the boy burned into him, enough to satisfy the gnawing ache that had lived in his chest since London. But something about the way Elena had looked at him, half fury, half collapse, had rooted him in place like a curse he wasn't strong enough to break. And now the hours bled together. He didn't remember when he sat down, or when the silence between them became something he could almost breathe through. Alexei stirred in his sleep, a soft sound that pierced deeper than any gunshot ever had. Luca's hand hovered just above the blanket, not quite touching, reverent as if the child were made of something holy. He wasn't sure what frightened him more, how badly he wanted to hold him, or how easily that desire had wrapped itself around his ribs like a noose. Behind him, Elena moved like a shadow across the room, pacing not out of fear, but out of habit. Her steps were measured, sharp, the kind of control that only came from years of swallowing the scream. You can't stay here, she said finally, voice low, precise. He turned, slow. You think I don't know that? Then why haven't you left? Because someone's watching this building. The words landed like frost on glass. She froze. What? He rose, his full height pressing against the dim light like a threat. I noticed it 3 nights ago. Same man, same coat, different positions. He's trained, not local. And you waited until now to tell me? I needed to be sure. You should have told me the first time you saw him. And you would have done what? Disappeared again? Her silence was answer enough. He stepped closer, the air between them tight as wire. I came to see you, that's all. But someone else came too, and not for sentiment. She exhaled like it hurt. You think it's your father. I know it is. The room thickened. He watched her shift, anger blooming under her skin like heat rising from a cracked window. So you brought your war here. To him. To you. The words were meant to wound. They did. Her jaw clenched. Her hands curled into fists she didn't raise. You have no idea what it took to keep him hidden. No idea what I gave up. And now you're saying he's in danger because you couldn't leave well enough alone? I'm saying, he cut in, voice soft but edged, that danger was coming whether I stood at your door or not. I'm the only one who can keep you two alive. She looked at him then, fully, and something in her gaze trembled. I don't want your protection. No, he said, stepping even closer. But you want him to live. And right now, Elena, that means trusting the one man you wish you could forget. A long pause stretched between them, slow and suffocating. Then, almost broken, she whispered, What do we do? He didn't hesitate. We run. She hadn't packed with care. There was no time for precision, no room for sentiment, just motion, mechanical, strained. Her hands moved faster than her thoughts, pulling essentials into a single duffel as if weight meant safety, as if speed could outrun blood. The walls of the apartment, once protective, now felt like teeth closing in. Every breath tasted like copper and betrayal. She hated him for being right. Luca stood by the window like a shadow stitched into the frame, unmoving, alert, his eyes scanning the street below with the same expressionless calm she had once mistaken for control. But she knew better now. It wasn't control. It was readiness. His stillness meant violence was close, and violence never came empty-handed. "You said he was trained?" she said without turning. "Yes." "Then why hasn't he come yet?" "Because he's waiting for an order, or watching for a mistake." She zipped the bag harder than necessary, her knuckles whitening with the effort. "So we make none." Luca didn't answer. Didn't need to. Behind her, Alexei stirred in his sleep, the rhythm of his breathing faltering just slightly, as if sensing the weight of her pulse. She crossed the room and crouched beside him, smoothing the hair from his forehead with a tenderness she no longer trusted herself to feel. He didn't wake. She wished she hadn't taught him how to sleep through tension. "Where will we go?" she asked, not looking up. He was behind her now, close enough to feel, not close enough to touch. His voice was low, steady. "I have places, one in Finland, one further." "Further where?" "Where names don't matter." She exhaled through her teeth, tired of riddles, tired of needing him, but she said nothing. There were no right questions when the answers would all lead to the same. Away. Luca reached down, lifting the bag from beside her with one hand. She heard the weight of it settle against his shoulder, the soft jingle of her key in the side pocket. It sounded final. Her throat tightened. "You shouldn't have." "I know. You've ruined everything." "No." Voice like, "I've only revealed what was always waiting." She stood, slowly, reluctantly. They faced each other in the quiet that wasn't peace. "What if I don't forgive you?" she whispered. "I'm not here for forgiveness." "Then why are you here?" His gaze held hers like a vow. "Because you're mine." The words should have broken some. Instead, they broke her silence. "Then prove it." He didn't speak again. But the look he gave her, the way his body stilled, the way his fingers flexed at his sides, was promise enough. Outside, the streetlight flickered once, and then the power died. The power cut wasn't a coincidence. It was a message, delivered in silence, carved in shadow. Luca didn't flinch. He had been waiting for it, feeling the shift in the air, the kind of stillness that never meant peace. He moved instinctively, reaching for the weapon hidden beneath his coat, eyes adjusting to the dark as if it belonged to him. "Elena," he said, voice a thread of steel. "Stay down. Keep him quiet." She didn't argue. That alone told him she understood now. This was no longer about memory, or hurt, or guilt. This was about survival. He stepped toward the door, every muscle taut, every breath measured. The building had fallen into a hush so complete it rang. No movement on the stairs, no voices, just the steady hum of tension coiled around his spine like a second skin. They weren't here to kill. Not yet. They wanted leverage. They wanted the boy. His grip tightened around the handle of his gun, and in his mind, a voice echoed that wasn't his father's this time. It was Elena's. Then prove it. He would. He had. He would again. They moved fast. He heard it. Just 3 floors down, a door cracked open. A footstep too soft to be casual. They were trying not to be heard. That was their mistake. Luca had been raised on silence, bred to anticipate what came just before the strike. Timing was everything. He pressed himself against the wall beside the entrance. Gun drawn, heartbeat so steady, it almost slowed time. One shadow passed across the frosted glass at the end of the hall. Then another. 2. Maybe 3. He could handle 3. The first one came through clean, quiet, knife in hand, head low. Luca didn't give him a chance to breathe, just stepped into the strike zone and drove the butt of the gun into his throat with ruthless precision. The man dropped without a sound. Second came fast, gun raised, but sloppy. Luca grabbed his wrist midair, turned the arm just enough to make the bone speak, and sent him face first into the doorframe. Blood sprayed, then silence again. The third didn't enter, which meant he was the smart one. Or the one waiting for a scream. Luca turned to Elena. She stood at the bedroom door, holding Alexei against her chest, eyes wide but unbroken. Brave didn't begin to cover what she looked like in that moment. She was fury. She was defiance wrapped in flesh. And she was his. "We have to move. Now," he said. She nodded, already stepping back into the bedroom, grabbing the smaller emergency bag she must have packed without telling him. Smart. Always 5 steps ahead in silence. They moved like shadows, down the back stairwell, past a neighbor's door cracked open just enough to see. No alarm, no questions. Zurich had learned long ago to look away from the wrong kind of men. Outside, the cold hit like a slap. The air carried the faint scent of gunpowder, and something more ancient, fear. He led them down the alley, every turn memorized, every blind corner anticipated. He'd mapped the escape route days ago, but now every second felt earned with blood. They reached the car. Unmarked, untraceable. Elena slid into the back seat with Alexei still pressed tight to her chest. She hadn't said a word. Luca got behind the wheel, eyes on the mirror, waiting for motion. Then he started the engine. As the tires bit into the wet street, he reached across the seat, not to touch her. Not yet, but to draw the line that would mark the difference between before and now. No more hiding, he said, voice raw. Not from me, not from them. I'll end it, Elena. All of it. But you have to let me. She didn't respond, but she didn't look away. The road curved like a secret kept too long, winding through trees that swallowed the moon and left only fragments of light to guide them. The car hummed beneath her, steady and low, a rhythm she couldn't trust but clung to anyway. Alexei slept curled in her lap, the weight of his small body grounding her when nothing else could. She stroked his hair absently, eyes fixed on the blur outside the window, but her mind was nowhere near Switzerland anymore. Luca hadn't spoken since they left the city limits. He drove like he fought, calm, precise, terrifyingly in control. She watched his hands on the wheel, the same hands that had broken men just hours before, now resting with deceptive ease. Hands that had once held her like she was something rare, something he didn't know how to name, and maybe he still didn't. "Where are we going?" she asked, voice hushed to keep from waking the boy. He didn't glance at her. "A safe house. It's remote, guarded. How long have you had it?" "Since before I knew you." She blinked, unsure why that answer hurt. Outside, snow began to fall. Fine, slow, deliberate. It dusted the windshield like ash. The silence between them stretched, heavy with all the things they hadn't said. She stared at his profile, sharp and distant, a face carved from frost and fire. And something cracked open inside her. Not wide, not loud, just enough to breathe differently. "Why didn't you come back?" she whispered. His fingers tightened on the wheel. "I did. Not soon enough. No, that was all. No excuse, no defense. Just truth." She turned her gaze forward again. The headlights cut through the dark, revealing more darkness. "I waited," she said, almost to herself, "even when I told myself I wasn't." He was quiet. She swallowed. "You could have sent a name, a number, anything. I didn't know what I was yet. And now?" He looked at her then, just for a moment, just long enough for her to feel the weight of his regret beneath the silence. "I'm the man who comes back." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, the years between them collapsed. The distance shrank. The pain didn't fade, but it shifted, became something shared instead of suffered alone. "I hate that you still sound like a promise," she said. His voice was a murmur wrapped in gravel. "Then stop listening." She didn't answer, because even in the dark, even in exile, even as fugitives, she still heard him too clearly. And that was the most dangerous part. Not that he had returned, but that some part of her had always been waiting for exactly this. He hadn't brought her here to convince her. Conviction was a quiet thing, born in moments where no one was watching, and Elena was never more dangerous than when silent. He had brought her here because instinct didn't lie, and his had screamed 3 nights ago when the man outside her apartment lingered too long after the lights went out. That hadn't been a threat. That had been a message. And Luca didn't run from messages. He answered them. The cabin stood like a memory at the edge of the forest, draped in snow and stillness, invisible to anyone not already looking. It smelled of cedar and gun oil, of cold air and old regrets. No photographs, no names. Just tools, weapons, routines carved into floorboards. It had been his once, long before her. Now it belonged to something else entirely. Alexei slept in the back room, curled against a mountain of wool blankets, unbothered by the storm outside. Elena sat in the living room, knees pulled to her chest, firelight brushing against her skin, like the ghost of a past neither of them had laid to rest. He watched her from the threshold. "You haven't asked where we are," he said. "I didn't think I had the right," she replied, voice low but unsparing. "You have more than you think." She turned toward him slowly, eyes sharp in the shadows. "Do I?" He didn't smile. "You have him. That's everything." She studied him, gaze searching, as if peeling back every layer he'd built to survive himself. "You didn't just come for him. No. You came for me." A beat passed, and then, "Yes." She looked back at the fire. "Say it." He stepped into the room, each movement quiet, deliberate. Not a hunter, not a soldier, just a man carrying something too fragile to drop. I came back for you. The words left his mouth like blood, like confession. She didn't cry. That wasn't her way. But her breath caught, sharp and sudden, like something had finally reached the place she'd tried to forget how to feel. I don't know how to forgive you, she said. I don't expect it. And if I never do, I'll still protect you. I'll still stay. The fire cracked softly. Shadows danced along her cheekbones. Her voice was softer when it returned, almost reluctant. You don't scare me the way you used to. That's not a comfort. It should be. He sat across from her, close but not close enough. The heat between them wasn't from the flames. Why did you disappear? She asked. He breathed slowly. Because I didn't think I deserved to stay. And now? He met her gaze, steady and raw. Now I don't care. The storm outside howled once, sharp and distant. Inside, the quiet pulsed like a heartbeat. They didn't move. They didn't need to. Because something had shifted, and neither of them could pretend it hadn't. The fire had died low, but neither of them moved to feed it. The warmth between them no longer came from flame. It lingered in the hush, in the pause between questions not yet asked, in the weight of everything they had not touched but couldn't look away from. The shadows curled softly across the room, drawing lines between them, boundaries that felt imagined now, boundaries she wasn't sure she believed in anymore. She watched him from beneath her lashes, every detail as familiar as it was foreign. The faint scar along his collarbone, the quiet strength in the way he sat, shoulders relaxed, but ready, always ready. He looked like a man who'd fought wars without telling anyone he bled, and still, he watched her like she was the only thing that could destroy him. The thought should have terrified her. It didn't. Why me? She asked finally. That night, you could have chosen anyone. His eyes lifted to hers. I didn't choose you. She tensed. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice quiet but steady. I saw you, and the rest of the world disappeared. There was no choosing after that. The room pulsed around his words. She swallowed, heart stammering against the memory of that night, of silk and breath and the unspoken certainty that something irreversible had been born between two strangers who had no business being that close. You make it sound like fate. No, he said, and there was steel beneath it. Fate is an excuse. This was something worse. Worse? It was inevitable. The silence between them cracked. She stood, unsure why, maybe just to breathe differently. Her hands curled into the edge of the table, grounding herself in the feel of something real. He didn't move, but his gaze followed her like gravity. I don't know how to stop hating you, she whispered. Then don't. She looked back at him, startled. Hate me, he said, but do it here, with me, not from a distance, not from exile. Her breath caught. You think this is about distance? I think you ran because loving me meant becoming something you swore you'd never be. She stared at him, long, unflinching, and in that silence, the truth bloomed between them, sharp as glass. I didn't just run from you, she said. I ran from myself. He stood then, slow, controlled, but there was something in his eyes that unspooled her, thread by thread. He crossed the room with the kind of stillness that made noise unnecessary, stopped just close enough for the air between them to change. I would have ruined you, he said softly. You did. He nodded. And yet here we are. She looked up at him, eyes wide, voice a breath. What now? His answer came without hesitation. Now, I give you a reason to stay. He hadn't touched her, not yet, but every breath between them felt like skin, every glance, a confession neither of them could voice. He could hear her heartbeat. No, feel it, in the way her breath stilled when he stepped close, in the slight tilt of her chin, like she was preparing for impact. But Elena was not the kind of woman who flinched. She braced. She burned. And still, she stood in front of him. He wanted to say her name again, but not as it used to live in his mouth, not like a weapon, like a vow, like the only truth that hadn't rotted beneath the weight of everything he'd been made to carry. Instead, he turned, one step back, two, distance, not because he wanted it, but because she deserved the choice. I'll understand, he said quietly, if you can't do this. She didn't speak right away, and when she did, it was quieter than breath. That's the problem, Luca. I don't want to understand you anymore. He looked back. I want to feel something that doesn't hurt. The snow outside pressed against the windows, heavy now, relentless. Somewhere in the forest, a branch cracked like bone under frost. He didn't move. Then I'll destroy what does. Her eyes narrowed. You say that like it's simple. It is. You and him. That's all. Everything else burns. She shook her head. You say it like it's a choice you haven't already made. He stepped forward again, this time slower, voice a rasp. You think I'd choose any of this if it meant losing you again? I think you've forgotten how to be anything but dangerous. I haven't forgotten. I've never been allowed to try. Her lips parted, but no words followed. He reached for the edge of the table between them, dragging his hand across its surface as if grounding himself. His voice dropped to something lower, rougher. I've burned every part of myself that didn't serve a purpose. But you remind me I was once human. She blinked slowly. And what are you now? He didn't smile. Yours. Something inside her faltered, just enough for him to see it. He knew then. She hadn't just been hiding from him. She'd been hiding from what she still wanted. He took a breath, held it, let it go slow. I'll leave tomorrow, he said. Alone. No. Her voice caught. Too fast. Too raw. No, she repeated, quieter now. You don't get to run this time? He stepped around the table, closing the last of the space between them. You said you didn't know how to forgive me. I don't. Then hate me, he whispered. But don't let me go. She stared at him, jaw tight, eyes glassed with fire and something far more dangerous. Hope. I can't promise anything, she said. I'm not asking for a promise. Then what are you asking for? He reached up, barely grazing her cheek with the back of his fingers. Reverent, careful, the way a man touches a miracle he believes might vanish. A chance to become the man you never got to know. And for the first time in years, she didn't pull away. The silence in the cabin had changed. It no longer pressed down like it did in Zurich, sharp, watchful, full of secrets. Now it wrapped around her slowly, like a blanket worn thin by memory. She walked to the window, fingers trailing the cold glass, and watched the wind pull through the trees, bending branches like prayer. Somewhere behind her, Luca moved through the kitchen with quiet precision, every sound deliberate, measured. He wasn't trying to disappear anymore, and that terrified her more than anything he'd ever left unsaid. She hadn't stopped waiting for him to vanish. Even now, with snow sealing them inside, with no footsteps tracking their escape, she kept listening for the absence, for the final slam of a door. But it never came. Instead, he stayed. She turned slightly, watching his profile from the corner of her eye. The man she remembered had always felt unreachable, made of angles and silence, his promises laced in smoke. But this version of him, he moved slower now, not less dangerous, just more real. He reached into the cupboard, pulled down a mug, and paused for a second longer than necessary, like he was remembering a life he never lived. I used to imagine this, she said. He glanced up. This? She nodded. You, here, doing something ordinary, like making coffee. He looked down at the kettle in his hand, then back at her. And? It never made sense, she whispered. You didn't belong in quiet places. He walked toward her, slow but sure, his steps a rhythm that matched the storm outside. Then maybe the place was wrong, not me. She smiled without humor. You still know exactly what to say. I mean every word. That's what makes it worse. He stopped just close enough for his voice to lower into something quieter. Do you want me to lie? No. She turned fully, facing him now, the window behind her casting pale light across her skin. I want it to mean something. It does. She shook her head, and he stepped closer. Elena. Her name in his mouth was a promise again, a prayer, a sin. I'm tired, she said, breath catching on truth, of building walls and pretending it didn't matter, of waking up every day with his eyes looking back at me and wondering what parts of you I'll have to explain away. His jaw flexed, but he didn't interrupt. I hate that you still feel like home. I hate that I ever gave you a reason to leave it. Something broke open between them. No crash, no fire, just the slow crumbling of a wall neither of them had known how to tear down. She stepped into the space that remained, and this time, he didn't wait. He reached for her with hands that shook just enough to feel human. No force, no possession, just reverence. Their foreheads touched first, then breath, then memory. Her voice trembled against his chest. I don't know who I am with you anymore. His answer came low, steady. You don't have to be anyone but the woman who survived everything I wasn't brave enough to stay for. And still, she didn't step back. There were no words left between them that hadn't already been carved into silence. She'd let him hold her. Not out of forgiveness, not yet, but out of something older, something deeper. And now, in the slow ache of morning, he sat by the window with a cigarette burning low between his fingers, watching the horizon split open with light. It was the kind of quiet that dared to feel like peace, and that made it dangerous. He didn't trust stillness. It was always followed by something sharp. The snow had slowed but hadn't stopped. Tracks vanished within minutes, a kind of mercy he didn't believe in. Beside him, the phone buzzed once. A message. Unmarked. Untraceable. He didn't need to read it to know. They'd been found. Again. He stubbed out the cigarette, stood, and walked to the sink, letting cold water run over his wrists like it could cleanse what was coming. It never did. Behind him, she entered the room barefoot, wrapped in one of his shirts like she didn't realize how much more lethal she looked this way. Hair undone, eyes still touched by sleep, but posture. Aware. She knew. Before he could speak, she crossed her arms. Is it time? He met her gaze. Yes. She didn't ask how. She didn't need to. Only, do we run again? No. Then what? He hesitated. Then quietly, we disappear differently this time. She moved closer, slowly, deliberately, like every step mattered. And maybe it did, because when she stood in front of him, the world shrank to nothing but the space between their breaths. I'm not afraid of them, she said. I know. I'm afraid of becoming the thing you were trained to be. His voice was a whisper. You won't. How do you know? He reached for her hand, laced their fingers. Because you still ask that question. Her eyes didn't close, but something softened. He could feel the war in her chest, the way love and survival collided in every beat. And he hated that he'd brought her here, hated more that there was no other way. I got a contact in Iceland, he said. Old friend, no ties, no blood. They'll help us cross unnoticed. And then what? We change names. Again. Start over. For real this time. She swallowed hard. You'll be able to walk away from all of it? I already did. Her voice lowered, cautious. But will it let you? He didn't answer. Because even now, even here, he wasn't sure. All he knew was this. Her hand in his felt like a life he hadn't earned, and he would burn the rest of the world before letting it go. He hadn't said goodbye. Not in words. Not in the way people do when they plan to return. But she felt it in the way he moved. The way he kissed her forehead instead of her lips. The way he held her that morning. Longer than necessary. Tighter than safe. There was something final in his silence, something that sounded too much like surrender, and she hadn't stopped him. She should have. Now, standing at the edge of the rented cabin's porch, the sky bruised with approaching storm, she listened for sounds that weren't there, footsteps on gravel, the low growl of an engine, his voice saying her name like a secret. But there was nothing, just wind, just cold, just Alexei asleep inside, unaware that everything in their world was tilting again. The boy was growing fast. Too fast. Some days she saw pieces of herself in him, stubbornness, quiet joy, the need to question everything. But other days, it was Luca, not just in the eyes, in the stillness, in the way Alexei watched the world like he expected it to change shape when no one was looking. He deserved more than shadows, more than running. She turned and went inside, shutting the door behind her like closing the cover on a book she hadn't finished reading. The air inside was warmer, but it didn't reach her bones. She moved through the space slowly, careful not to wake him. The cabin felt hollow without Luca's presence. No boots by the door, no quiet exhale from the corner where he used to sit and watch her like she might vanish again. She hated that she missed him, hated more that she didn't know if he was still alive. She sat on the edge of the small bed, watching her son breathe, small and steady, a rhythm she clung to like a prayer. Then her gaze dropped to the envelope on the table. No return address, no markings. Just her name in handwriting she didn't recognize. She hadn't opened it yet. Part of her was afraid to. Afraid it would confirm what she already suspected, that he'd left her a future without him in it. Her fingers brushed the edge of the paper. A sound outside. Sharp. Controlled. Not wind. Her heart stilled. She stood, moved to the window with the same careful steps she'd once used on stage, pulled the curtain back an inch, and froze. There, across the snow, stood a man. Not Luca, but someone who carried his shape, same height, same posture, but wrong, too clean, too still. And then he turned. She knew that face, but not from memory, from the photo Luca had once hidden, Nikolai Orlov, and he had come alone, which meant he hadn't come in peace. The snow didn't care who bled on it. It swallowed footsteps and secrets with equal mercy, covering the world in silence, one flake at a time. Luca walked without hurry, because men like him didn't need to rush. He had been raised in patience, sharpened by waiting. But tonight, something in his blood moved faster than his body. A thrum beneath the skin, a warning dressed as instinct. He knew what it meant. Nikolai had made his move. He hadn't needed confirmation. He'd felt it the moment the message arrived. Unsigned, untraceable, but unmistakable in its purpose. The kind of message only sent by someone who used to know the rhythm of his breath. Someone who once stood beside him, before betrayal became prophecy. He reached the edge of the forest just as the lights of the cabin came into view, and he saw it. One figure, Too still, too sure. Nikolai. No backup, no hesitation, which meant the decision had already been made. Luca's hand slid into his coat, fingers brushing steel, but he didn't draw. Not yet. He stepped into the clearing, boots crunching through crusted ice, and met his former brother in silence. The wind curved between them like a held breath. "You're late," Nikolai said, voice flat, untouched by cold. "I wasn't invited." Nikolai's gaze shifted. "She saw me. She'll do worse than see you if you touch him." "I wouldn't." Luca narrowed his eyes. "Not unless I have to." Silence folded around them again. He could hear his own pulse now, steady and dark. And behind it, the memory of when they stood on the same side of every line. "You came alone," Luca said. "So did you." "No, I have something to lose." "That's the difference," Nikolai murmured. "You used to know how not to." Luca took a step closer. "What did he promise you?" "Nothing." "Liar." Nikolai's jaw tightened. "It wasn't about him." "Then why now?" "Because you left the gates open." Luca's voice dropped. "I walked away. You walked away with the heir. And there it was. Not rage, not revenge, grief." "You could have told me," Nikolai said, almost quiet. "You would have tried to stop me. I would have helped you disappear." "No," Luca said. "You would have followed orders." Nikolai didn't deny it. Their eyes locked. Years of blood and loyalty hovered between them like ash. Then Nikolai took one breath. Just one. "She deserves to know." Luca's voice was a blade. "If you go near her again..." "I came to say goodbye." The wind shifted. Snow fell heavier. And Nikolai stepped back. Not out of fear, but because some wars ended without a shot. Just the sound of two men turning their backs for the last time. Luca didn't watch him go. He was already walking toward the cabin, toward the only future that had ever made him believe in something beyond survival. And this time, he wasn't late. She felt him before she saw him. The shift in the air, the unspoken weight that threaded through the room the moment the cabin door creaked open. No one else moved like that, like a storm holding its breath. She turned, heart already racing, but not from fear, from recognition, from the unbearable relief that settled in her bones the second his eyes met hers. Luca stood in the doorway, snow melting on his shoulders, jaw tight, breath uneven. But he was alive, whole, still hers in ways neither of them had the language for. She didn't ask what happened, didn't speak, just stepped forward slowly, as if afraid a single word might shatter the fragile space between survival and collapse. He didn't move, not at first. Then, he reached out, fingers brushing hers, grounding her. "It was Nikolai," she said softly. "I know. Why did he come?" "To remind me what I almost became." She searched his face. "And? I'm not that man anymore." She wanted to believe him, but belief was a dangerous thing. It asked for pieces of you might never get back. Still, she didn't let go. He moved past her into the cabin, shrugging off his coat, his eyes scanning the room the way they always did, cataloging exits, threats, shadows. But something was different now. The way his shoulders stayed tense, the way his mouth didn't soften even after she touched him. Something had shifted. Or maybe something was ending. "You're not staying, are you?" she asked. His silence was confirmation. Her breath caught, fragile. "Where?" "Russia." The word landed like frost on skin. "To finish it," he added. "For good." "You said you were done." "I thought I was. You said we were starting over." "We will." She shook her head. "You can't build a future on ghosts." "I'm not trying to build one. I'm trying to protect it." She turned away, pain blooming beneath her ribs, bitter and hot. He stepped closer, voice quieter now. "I need you to trust me." "I do," she said. "That's the problem." He reached for her gently, fingers brushing the curve of her neck, grounding her the way he always did, without force, without question. "If I don't come back..." "No." "Elena." "No," she repeated, turning to face him fully. "You don't get to say that. Not to me. Not now." His voice broke on her name. Just once. Just enough. She placed her hand over his heart, felt it thunder beneath her palm like it was trying to speak for him. "You come back," she whispered. "Or don't go at all." He didn't answer, but he didn't walk away either. And for now, that was enough. The air in St. Petersburg didn't just bite, it carved. Each breath he drew felt like glass, sharp and clean, slicing into memory as if the city itself was reminding him of everything he'd once sworn to forget. Snow fell in slow, silent spirals over rooftops blackened by time, settling on the shoulders of men who hadn't earned warmth in years. He walked through them like a ghost with purpose, unseen but not unnoticed. The weight of his name opened doors. The truth of what he'd become would close them. The meeting was underground. Of course it was. Old tunnels beneath the ice, vaulted ceilings echoing with the secrets of dead men. He moved like silence wrapped in flesh, not because he feared them, but because he knew them too well. He'd worn their mask, killed beside them, lied for them, bled under their orders, and now he would end them. They didn't rise when he entered, just turned, slowly, like wolves sensing the scent of a rival they once called brother. 7 men, the last of the old guard. He wondered how many would crawl back out into the cold by nightfall. "You came," one said, the words stretched thin by disbelief. "You summoned," Luca replied, voice low, deliberate. "I accepted. And what will you offer?" Another asked, younger, smug. "You've already taken what matters." Luca stepped closer, removed his gloves, unhurried. "You think she was what I took?" The youngest leaned forward. "You took the air." Luca's mouth twitched. Not a smile, something colder. "I gave him something you never could, freedom." The oldest of them, Dimitri's closest ally, stood now. "You forget who you are." "No," Luca said. "I finally remembered." He laid a single object on the table. Not a weapon, not money, a ring, black steel, engraved with the crest of Volkov. They stared. He let the silence stretch until it ached. "I'm not asking for power," he said. "I'm burying it. You don't get to—" "I do," he cut in, voice cutting through the dark like blade through breath, "because I was the only one who ever earned it, and now I'm choosing to end it. And if we say no," Luca looked at them like men already marked for ash, "then you'll see what I've become without it." Silence again, but this one was different, a choice. He could feel it crack, somewhere deep beneath their feet, the final fracture in the foundation of everything they had built from blood. One man stood, then another, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. They would not fight him, not tonight. He walked away before the rest could stand, before any of them could remember pride. Outside, the wind screamed across the river, and the sky split open with snow. Luca didn't look back, not once, because this time, he wasn't carrying the name Volkov. He was leaving it behind. The wind was different in Iceland. It didn't bite. It hummed. It moved like a song written for no one, brushing against the windows of the small coastal cottage with a rhythm that made her feel, for the first time in years, like the world had finally exhaled. Snow still fell, but it didn't threaten. It softened. She stood by the window wrapped in wool and memory, watching the sea shimmer in the half-light of morning, her fingers curled around a mug she hadn't touched in minutes. Behind her, Alexei's laughter spilled from the back room, sharp, bright, utterly free. He was older now, taller, more questions in his eyes, but fewer shadows. He carried pieces of Luca, of course, the tilt of his head, the sharpness in his silences, but he smiled like her, unapologetically, often. Some nights, he asked about his father, and some nights, she answered. But most nights, she simply lit a candle and let the silence hold what neither of them had words for. The envelope had arrived 2 weeks ago. No return address, just her name in a familiar, steady hand. She hadn't opened it immediately. She hadn't needed to. The weight of it said everything. He was alive, or had been. He'd written with the finality of a man who didn't expect a reply. She'd waited until now, until the wind stopped humming, until her hands stopped shaking. She broke the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper, the creases still sharp, the ink pressed deep. "Elena, there are things I will never ask you to forgive. Not because you shouldn't, but because I wouldn't know what to do if you did. I told myself I could walk away from you, that I could burn what I was and leave the ruins behind. But then he looked at me, and I knew. Some names deserve to die, but not his. I won't return to you in shadows. I won't make you live beneath a story you never wrote. So I leave this behind, not as a goodbye, but as proof that I chose differently, for him, for you, for once. I chose love. LV. She read it twice, then again, and still, her hands didn't tremble. Outside, the sea pulled against the rocks, restless and endless and alive. She folded the letter and tucked it into the spine of a book on the shelf, just beneath a worn photograph of 3 people no one else would ever recognize. Then she turned back to her son, and smiled. "If you're hearing this, it means I did what I said I would. Not the dying, that part was never the plan, but the choosing, the walking away, the silence. You always knew I wasn't made for soft things, Elena, but I loved you in every way I wasn't supposed to, quietly, violently, entirely. I just never knew how to stay without bringing the fire with me. I remember that night in London, the first one, before your name, before your voice became the only sound that could quiet the war in my chest. You were light in a room that reeked of politics and power. You walked like you didn't owe anyone anything, and for the first time in years, I wanted to know someone's story more than I wanted to own it. I didn't speak. Not really. I didn't need to. You looked at me like you already knew who I was, and you stayed anyway. You were never the fragile thing they imagined you to be. You were steel wrapped in velvet. You broke in silence and rebuilt without asking for permission. I used to watch you sleep, not because you looked peaceful, but because it was the only time you didn't carry the weight of the world in your eyes. I wanted to be the man who let you rest. I became the one who made you run, and I've never forgiven myself for that. But this letter, it's not about regret. It's about the pieces I left with you. Alexei, he's more than blood. He's more than a name I tried to burn out of the world. He's the only thing I've ever made that didn't carry violence on its back. When he speaks, I hope he never lowers his voice out of fear. When he loves, I hope he doesn't question whether he deserves it. Teach him how to forgive himself, even when it feels like he shouldn't. Teach him that strength isn't the absence of softness, but the courage to keep it alive. I won't be there to teach him how to fight, but maybe he won't need to. Because you taught me something no one else ever did. That a man could be broken and still worthy. That love wasn't something to survive, but something to surrender to. And I did. I surrendered. Not to death, to you. If I had the choice again, I'd find you in that ballroom. Every time. And every time I'd ask you to dance. So if you ever wonder, if you ever need to know whether I meant it, whether I chose you, I did, and I always will. If you've made it this far, thank you. Your presence here means more than I could ever write. Truly. Every like, every comment, every share, it's not just interaction, it's oxygen. It tells the story. This mattered. It whispers to the algorithm, yes, but more than that, it whispers to me, to keep writing, to keep giving you everything I have, to make the next story deeper, truer, warmer. So if this touched you, if even a single sentence stayed in your chest, please let me know. Leave a like. Write even a simple, I'm here. It's more powerful than you think. And if you're not subscribed yet, I'd be honored to have you with us. It's free. And it means you'll never miss what comes next. Because there's always more. More love, more shadow, more beauty. And if your heart allows, share this with someone who needs to feel something again. The world is loud, fast, fractured. But maybe, if enough of us believe in soft stories with sharp truths, we can make something quieter, brighter, together. Thank you for being here, and may you always, always feel welcome.